culture.
I'm Tori Bedford. Tonight on Greater Boston, after nearly 2 weeks of no school, when will the Newton teacher strike end? And are these strikes becoming the new normal? Then Steward Healthcare is teetering on financial ruin. What brought them there, and what does this mean for patients? And finally, Zimbabwean American poet, author, speaker, singer, and educator Umeni Malawa Ado shares her story from the stage. Newton students were home for their 9th school day as negotiations drag on between striking teachers and the city's school committee. This strike is now nearly twice as long as any other of its kind in recent state history. The executive director of the Massachusetts Association of School Committees, Glenn Koocher, joins me now to discuss. So we've seen a number of strikes, I think 7 strikes across Massachusetts.
Half a dozen.
Yeah, in the last few years,
2 years.
really. Is this part of a larger trend? I mean, Newton is exceptional, right? This is a 9-day strike.
Yeah.
This is a new record, but...
I think more districts are feeling empowered to strike. I think the parent union, the MTA, is encouraging them to exercise that power. So as a result, we're seeing half a dozen in the last 2 years where we hadn't seen a strike since 2005 before that, 1995 before that.
And we've been covering Newton pretty much every day. We went out yesterday, we spoke to students and teachers and parents, and we also spoke to the Massachusetts Teachers Association President, Max Page. This is him talking about, just in the last few years, how COVID impacted teachers.
The educators during COVID felt like they worked heroically to transition to online learning and then back into schools, and have dealt with all the impact on their own families, themselves, seeing the students and what they've suffered. I think it's made them less patient with accepting inequities in the schools, as well as less patient with things that have gone on for years and years and have been unaddressed. And that includes fighting for mental health supports like they are in Newton. It means fighting for living wages for paraprofessionals, or what we call education support professionals, or fair pay in general.
So what do you think of that? I mean, COVID as an impact, I'm sure...
COVID was hard for everybody.
Yeah.
And the unions did well positioning themselves, getting their talking points and strategies in place to deal with COVID. But I don't think that and teaching is a very stressful profession. It's hard for everybody. You've got to be on all day long. You don't get to take time out for long periods of time as people in the private sector might get to do. But I don't think that COVID itself was the stimulus for the greater measure of emotion and action that's gone into negotiating that's led to the strikes. During COVID, people adapted, they adjusted. They did a lot of remote education, which didn't work very well, but it was the best strategy that we had. And the unions were extraordinarily astute in mobilizing themselves. For example, their theme was, not until it's safe will we go back to school. In other words, the sub-message, we'll decide when it's safe because we're using COVID to show you how powerful we can be. A brilliant strategy. And the MTA has had brilliant strategies around how it's done what it's done. I commend them for that. I did damage control myself for a very long time in crisis communication, and I give them a lot of credit for mobilizing around COVID to strengthen their position as advocates for teachers, advocates for kids. They would have claimed, I'd say, that everyone was an advocate for children at that time.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the time they might argue that not until it's safe would be until the CDC determines that these conditions are safe. And a lot of what was coming up was, the HVAC systems in schools, right, were not up to date. So the air circulation wasn't good. And so the teachers were saying, why should I be risking my life as a frontline worker and going, into these environments for this amount of pay, for, say $29,000 a year as a paraprofessional in Newton?
I was first elected to the Cambridge School Committee 50 years ago. Back then, it was HVAC that people complained about. The architects will tell you everybody wants a big monument, everybody wants a great structure, and by the time they're getting ready for the infrastructure, the HVAC, the money's all gone and it doesn't work. And I think the unions have very skillfully used the ventilation problem to argue that maybe conditions need to be better. However, and I would stand by this, wherever they've complained about ventilation, it was only the teachers who were getting sick. And the best teachers didn't get sick. I got to tell you, it was a tactic, and it worked very well, but I don't think it was as truthfully articulated as it should have been.
When you say the best teachers weren't getting sick, what do you mean?
I mean, in my experience from my school committee days, the teachers who got sick were not the best teachers. They were the teachers who didn't like teaching. They were the people that weren't particularly effective. They were the people who might have been getting hard times from their principals about, should you still be in the profession? And the kids didn't get sick.
We're talking about getting COVID, though. I mean, a lot of
No,
teachers.
COVID is different. I'm talking about HVAC and the HVAC.
Right, but in reference to COVID, I think that was a big part of it, as well as the ventilation's poor, and then the kids are in this cramped space, and people are masking and they refuse.
The talking point was, we'll decide when it's safe to go back, only when it's safe. And that was a tactic to demonstrate that we want to be in charge, we should be in charge. To some extent, we are in charge. We'll decide when we go back.
But I think the teachers are saying they want to be in charge, right? If they're a part of a union, so they're represented.
The employees have a right to argue that they should have a meaningful say in what happens to them on the job. They absolutely should.
And let's talk about Newton just real quick, because I know we'll be back tonight. Hopefully we don't have another school day off tomorrow. Hopefully they can come to the table. What's the latest on Newton? As you know, I know there was a final agreement, offer from the school.
It's an offer made today, and they're negotiating. And I have to say that the mediator has proclaimed that both parties have been negotiating in good faith. So good faith does not mean capitulation. Good faith means you come to the table, you talk about everything, you bargain reasonably. The old contract stays in effect until the new contract is negotiated.
We don't have a contract since
No, the
August.
old contract remains in effect until the new contract is negotiated. What you don't have are new pay raises. The old salary scale stays in effect. The step raises, the lane raises for academic achievement, they stay in effect. But the rest of the contract remains as it is, and you have to negotiate over new benefits or expanded benefits as might occur. So that's what needs to be settled.
Right, so because the offer that they gave was address the Unit C, so the paraprofessionals who were getting paid less than $30,000 a year, raising them by, I think, 4.8% COLA, and then everybody else, all the other aspects of bringing in mental health professionals, that stuff would be, you're saying later on.
That stuff may still be on the table, I don't know. But with regard to the paraprofessionals, many of the paraprofessionals in other districts have been given pay raises and the opportunity to work additional hours. And I don't know of a single teacher who doesn't value their paraprofessional that works with them or who doesn't want one to work with them. So that's a win-win situation for everybody. The school district gets more time from the people that are working for them, and the paras may end up with significant raises hourly and in terms of hours worked.
Glenn Koocher, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Steward Health Care, which runs several hospitals and urgent care centers across Massachusetts, is on the brink of financial collapse, and their patients are paying the price. The National Healthcare Network owes around $50 million in unpaid rent, which has already forced hospitals in Massachusetts to close. And in at least one of their hospitals, life-saving medical equipment was repossessed. Medical reporter Jessica Bartlett has been doggedly covering this story for the Boston Globe. She joins me now. Jessica, thank you so much for being here and for your reporting. So you were the first to break this story. What's going on with Steward?
Yeah, so Steward is under tremendous financial strain. They haven't been paying their vendors for some time. There's at least 14 lawsuits in Massachusetts. I do want to be clear, only one hospital in Massachusetts they've announced closure of, but there are a lot of concerns that they might not be able to continue operating their facilities, particularly because their landlord in a public statement said that Steward nationally would be looking to sell off some of its hospitals in order to kind of recoup some of the debt that they're facing.
And you mentioned, I know you did this report on this woman, Sungita Rashid. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
Sungita Rashid, yeah.
Sungita, I'm sorry. She was affected by a piece of medical equipment being recalled. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so Sangita came with her husband, Nabil Haq. She was 33 weeks pregnant. They are a Bangladeshi couple. They'd gotten their PhDs in the States and then moved abroad for work and came back. for work. And she delivered at St. Elizabeth's Medical Center in the morning. And by the afternoon, wasn't feeling well. And so they did some tests, discovered she was bleeding in her abdomen, and took her in for an operation. Now in the OR, they realized that the coils, these embolism coils, which are these metallic things that they insert through the veins, were not there to help them stem the bleeding. So they had to transfer her to another hospital, but she did not make it. And experts say, in any case of trauma where you have kind of serious bleeding, time is of the essence. And the manufacturer for those coils, Penumbra, had said weeks prior that they were going to repossess their supplies at the hospitals because Steward had not paid their bills.
Steward, yeah, they haven't paid their bills, they haven't paid their rent, and her story is so heartbreaking because I think it's a key example of a much larger problem. I mean, just how big of a crisis is this for the state and for healthcare across the state?
Yeah, so not only have patients not been able to get necessary health care in the last several weeks, but some people are saying this has been going on for months, that patients have been calling for several months trying to just get appointments and haven't been able to get through. Their primary care docs told one patient, well, you can't get through because we don't have enough staff to answer the phones or return phone calls. Some patients couldn't get surgery scheduled or have surgeries postponed or canceled because they didn't have the necessary medical equipment. Mass General Brigham pulled their doctors out of a Steward facility recently because of supply problems. And so these have been persistent challenges that have kind of hampered healthcare around the state, and in so doing, put pressure on those that remain to kind of accommodate the care that they're not getting elsewhere.
Yeah, I mean, this would affect other hospitals as well. There's been some pushback from intervention from state leaders at a Massachusetts congressional delegation earlier just last week. They wrote a letter saying that a briefing on Steward's financial position, they were asking for the status of your Massachusetts facilities and your plans to ensure the communities Steward's hospitals serve are not abandoned. They have not disclosed what their financial situation has been to the state. And so there's been some intervention from state leaders. I know you wrote about Elizabeth Warren being suspicious of their claims, right? Because they've said that they don't have any money, and they've done this in other places as well because of Medicaid billing. That's the line from Steward.
Yeah, so Steward is blaming a lot of their financial problems on reimbursement rates. And so it is true that they have a higher mix of patients in their hospitals that are on Medicaid and Medicare, which typically reimburse less than commercial insurance. And their commercial reimbursement rates are lower than some of the academic medical centers in the state. Steward has pointed to those as the reason why they're facing these financial problems and challenged legislators to fix those things. But Warren and others, most recently today, Congresswoman Trahan said, they really questioned that premise. They've noted that Steward has closed facilities in Texas most recently, citing the same kind of concerns. But Steward is a for-profit system that was formed through a private equity venture. And so there are a lot of questions about what role the private equity group played in the decisions that they've made that have put them in this predicament. And was it truly just Medicaid that were the source of their financial distress?
You mentioned, let's hear from State Representative Lori Trahan at a congressional hearing.
For their reasoning, Steward executives have pointed to, you guessed it, low Medicaid reimbursement rate as the cause for their financial distress. But earlier this month, it was revealed that the company has missed rent payments to an outside landlord that actually owns the property and buildings their facilities operate in. It's looking more and more like this is part of a dangerous Steward private equity playbook.
I mean, what do you make of this? What does the hospital do right now? Obviously, there are multiple things going on, right? There is a looming crisis. I think you mentioned they have until the end of the month to kind of explain what's going on. Patients have already been affected, but if I'm a patient and I regularly get medical help, or I go to a medical practice that's run by Steward, what should I be doing now?
Yeah, so I think the first thing is for patients not to panic. The one closure that Steward has announced in Massachusetts as far as a rehab hospital, and their plans for other hospitals have not yet been made clear. So there aren't yet any closures on the docket. They do have to tell the state if they're planning on those closures. That hasn't always been the case, that they've followed those rules in the case of Quincy Medical Center, where they only gave 60 days notice as opposed to the 90 days that they're supposed to give. But typically, we would have some kind of notification of a closure. But that said, patients should stay in touch with their doctor. Talk to them about if they're concerned about accessing medical care, if they've got prescriptions they need more urgently than like an annual doctor's visit. And if you're truly concerned, just knowing where you would go in an emergency were something to shift. But I think the biggest thing for now is not to panic while we get a better grasp of what the kind of lay of the land is. Now, Steward did tell regulators, sources have told me, that they had till the end of the month, according to their lender, was pressuring them to have a plan by then. But there wasn't even confidence if that timeline was true. As of today, we don't yet have any plans from Steward. So we're still kind of waiting to see what are their next steps and what does that mean kind of for the state long term.
And it sounds like a lot of the doctors are really concerned as well, because you've reported that doctors have been reaching out to other hospitals to ask if they could be transferred. And your colleague John Chesto wrote recently about a possibility of Mass General Brigham absorbing Steward. Where is that plan at? Is that a reality that looks likely?
I think a lot of people are looking to Mass General Brigham as this white knight or savior, given their size and scope in the state. Whether they're going to take on some or all Steward facilities, I think, is unclear. I think it's unlikely they would take on the vast majority. They might play a role in some kind of situation moving forward. Steward has told state officials that it has an interest in transferring ownership to other health systems, but it's really unclear if MGB wants to play that role and to what degree they might. And so I think a lot of those conversations are underway as well right now. But as you mentioned, in the interim, a lot of doctors, there are a number who have stuck with Steward Healthcare. They're committed to these communities. But a number of them are trying to just care for their patients. And so in order to do that, they're asking for credentialing permission from other hospitals to do their surgeries there. And so these doctors are trying to find any way to care for patients in the interim as all this stuff happens. And as we wait to see what other health systems might be in the mix, what Steward decides, I think everyone is waiting for Steward to make the next decision and to react from there.
So the doctors might be able, like you said, patients should reach out to their doctors. And if your doctor has a plan for transition, maybe you can be a part of that. I don't know. It's so much is up in the air. Can we talk about Norwood Hospital? So Norwood Hospital closed, I think, almost 4 years ago. They had severe flooding. They've been under construction. They're part of the Steward system. How would this affect that? They're supposed to open, I think, in 2025.
Yeah, the timeline for Norwood is really unclear. The construction has been slow going. They've got steel in the ground from pictures that I've seen, but I don't really know if they're making a lot of progress. And so it's really unclear if Norwood would even be, the construction would continue there, who might occupy Norwood if Steward were to transfer ownership or close it. But the closure of Norwood and the catastrophic flooding that took place there in 2020 has taken place in a broader context. You also had the fire at Brockton Hospital in 2023. You had Quincy Medical Center transitioned to a satellite emergency room. That also closed in 2020. And so all of those closures, particularly in the southeast region of the state, have put a ton of pressure on those that remain. For example, South Shore Health, they count 374 licensed beds, but on average, they are seeing 500 patients a day with peaks that get up to 560. So far more than they are typically accustomed to caring for. They are disaster planning on a daily basis to accommodate the volume. And so that's just kind of an example of how some of these closures in the past have already stressed the remaining facilities. This is on top of a capacity crisis the state is facing at large. And so whether other facilities could accommodate patients coming to them really depends on the region, but it's certainly a region-wide crisis in where Steward facilities are.
Great. Jessica Bartlett, thank you so much for your reporting. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Finally tonight, what's in a name for Zimbabwean-American writer and performer Umeni Malawa Ado? The answer is a lot. She shared the meaning of her name and identity on GBH's original series, Stories from the Stage. And we bring you that story now as part of a new partnership with that show and this one.
My mother has a green thumb. Perhaps it's because she grew up on a farm in Chipinge in Zimbabwe, or perhaps she just has this gift of giving life to everything that she touches. When we go on long drives in Murambi in Zimbabwe, always in the back of a car is a little shovel and a small box. And anytime we drive and she sees a small plant or a flower, she will stop the car and go out like a ballerina and with the gentle surgeon's precision lift that beautiful plant or flower and take it back home. She tasks me with watering the flowers. Not too much water, not too little, but always with love. She tells me that plants have feelings and flowers too. And I can tell from the exploring paradise of her home that they love her right back. They are the lucky ones. I too am lucky. Like them, I grew in the seed that was my mother's body. I'm told that my mother was a few days overdue when she had me. Apparently, there were still some things I needed to do. So my father said in his native tongue, he's Ndebele, what are we waiting for? Umeleni. And thus, I have my given name. And so my lifelong mission has been to figure out how to answer that much loaded question. I was born in a small village in a small town called Leominster, Massachusetts. I don't know much about it at all. All the things that I'm told are apparently I was really obsessed with Sesame Street. My first words were juice, mummy, juice, and I've seen pictures of myself in a pink snowsuit. I was 4 years old when we moved back to Rhodesia, right in time to be on the front lines of a revolution. I was too young to know, but young enough to feel the fear of gunshots in the night, the sound of gumboots and soldiers running through my grandmother's farm. And at night we would sleep in concentration camps. I was told it was to keep us safe. But we gained independence in 1980, and I grew in the new Zimbabwe, post-independence. I was lucky enough to go to private schools, and I loved school, particularly English and drama and music. And my teachers nourished that creative longing in my soul. And I also went to school in South Africa, and it was there I have one of my fondest memories of my high school teacher who coerced me into singing at a school variety show. I admit I was a little nervous. I used to sing with a choir in the safety of the cocoon of the choir, but this time she wanted me to do a solo. So I thought about what would I sing, and Tracy Chapman songs came in my mind. So I wanted to sing Last Night. Oh, I remember that moment when I sang it on stage. Everyone was quiet. And in that moment, oh my goodness, a star was born in my mind. And I remember dreaming of Mariah Carey songs and on Vogue, and I'll be on stage and people would be screaming. And my brother, he would be there. I would bind his restless legs and he would listen to my genius. I had really grand visions then, but isn't that what good teachers are supposed to inspire? You see, I was the seed. School was my soil, and my teachers, they were the water. But the thing is, the arts weren't really a thing then. I needed to concentrate on more important things like math and physics and think about what I would do and be in the future. But I wanted something different. I wondered what would happen if I went into a new place, new soil. What kind of flower would I bloom? So I decided that I would do something different. I decided to come back to America on my own. I remember that long flight. I remember it like yesterday. I remember that time because I wasn't talking to my mom, although I did manage to coerce her to braid my hair in cornrows because I wanted to make doubly sure that people knew that I was African when I landed. Yes, I did. I remember the biting cold. It was so cold, right down to my bones, and my biological father picked me up that day, and I remember as we were driving to Newton, he was telling me all the things I would expect in college, but all I could think of is, I missed the sun. I miss the sun. I miss the sun like the soil must miss the rain. I miss the echo of my language. I even missed my baby brother. And he would unravel my cassette tapes. I even missed that. But this was new soil. This is a new place for me to be. You see, I wanted to carve out my own destiny. You see, most people immigrate because they're running away from something. And in my case, I was running away from the oppressive regime that was my parents. They were stern and strong and brilliant, but I wanted to be somewhere different. So I came to Boston, and this became my new soil, my new land, where I could just be. But I have to admit that when I was in college, I was really annoyed at a couple of things. First is, people would always question what kind of African I was. Why did I speak English so well? Who taught it to me? Did I have a pet lion? Things like that. And then they'd also want to touch my hair without permission, change my name to suit their palate. I really didn't appreciate that, but honestly, there were other times I really enjoyed myself. I took part in jazz band, I learned a lot about music, and interestingly enough, it is only in America when I came back, I was able to reclaim my name. You see, no one in my family calls me Umeleni. My parents all call me Melanie or Mel or different variations depending on their mood. And it is only when I came to America and I started performing that I realized I need a stage name. So I started thinking of all these interesting names, and then I took a step back and realized, wait a minute, I have an interesting name, Umeleni. What are we waiting for? It's funny that it took me coming back to America to reclaim my name. But it makes sense because this was my beginning, right? This is the place of my birth. You see, in Boston, I've been able to live out the dreams I had as a kid, the dreams of being a writer, of performing on stages. And yes, I didn't quite get to the whole Mariah Carey status or on Vogue, but I've had the privilege and pleasure of performing on many stages and being warmly loved and received and acknowledged as an artist here in Boston, in this soil. You see, the seeds were planted in Africa, but the flower bloomed and continues to bloom here in Boston. Boston has been the place of many firsts. My first love, I met him here. I married him. My child was born here. My first job, so many things. You see, I am a seed. I am an immigrant. I am Zimbabwean. I am American. We are all seeds, aren't we? Seeds that scatter, seeds that fall, seeds that are yearning to bloom, to grow, to evolve. My mother tells me that plants have feelings and flowers too, and that really we are all seeds just yearning to grow. Thank you.
You can catch more stories from the stage Mondays at 9:30 p.m. on World and Fridays at 8 here on GBH2 or anytime on the Stories from the Stage Facebook page and YouTube channel. And in 2 weeks, you can catch some stories in person at the Stories from the Stage live Valentine's Day soiree. Yes, Valentine's Day is only 2 weeks away. For tickets, head to gbh.org/events. That's all we have for tonight, but come back tomorrow. Reporter Susan Zalkine will join us on her new book, The Waltham Murders, and why she believes solving the 2011 triple slaying could have prevented the Boston Marathon bombings. Then we'll dig into the terrifying AI trend targeting celebrities and people like you and me. That and more tomorrow at 7. Thanks for watching. Good night.
Laura Simmons.